and my association with all the, basically the small and some not quite so small planes. How we put our gizmo on various kinds of aircraft. And then lastly, just some other things that we did using that little camera on a plane at different locations for different customers. So very, very quickly, came from Utah, have a master's in physics and chemistry and math. Worked for a bunch of companies. Had like 20 top secret, above top secret clearances, including nuclear. So I saw a whole bunch of different things. And so these are some of the organizations that I supported. You probably recognize those in red. Those in black are not so easily recognized. I did not work as an employee of any of these. I worked as an employee of an aerospace company. But we had that company had contracts with these people. So these are the kind of projects that I supported, from satellites down through satellite payloads, stealth aircraft, stealth drones, regular drones, large aircraft, missiles, chem-bio, missile defense. We had a project that was a multinational project with our friends from the Brits, the Aussies, and the Canadians. Some work with drug labs. I did not build any nuclear bombs, but I had the clearances to do that, I guess. The other thing was submarines and lasers. One of the things we did was we looked at, right now submarines it's very difficult to communicate with a submarine. And the reason is because they're submerged. And the salt water in the ocean is not conductive to our radio frequencies. And so you have to go lower and lower and lower. And you have to go down to 46 hertz in order to communicate. And the antennas are miles buried, and they're miles long. And the data rate is about as fast as a one-year-old speaking. It's just infinitely slow. But they asked us, they said, can we communicate with a submerged submarine with a laser? And how do we go do that? So that was one of the projects. Another thing here is this guy up in the corner on Hainan Island. I think I misspelled that too. That is an island owned by China, and it's just barely off the coast of China in the South China Sea. It's got Vietnam on one side, it has the Philippines on the other side, Taiwan is just a little bit above, and then Japan is further up. And what the Chinese did was they hollowed out the back end of the south end of this island, totally hollowed it out, and they built an underground submarine base there. And what you can see, right there is the submarine going in. And this picture is a Google Earth picture, so I don't have any issues with that. But I watched them work on this. There's a railroad track coming in on the other side of the island that's all camouflaged. You can't see it, but I watched it as everything was being built. And one of the interesting things was that when they were building it, right here, the boring machine that was boring out all the soil actually poked through the side of the wall of the island, and it turned out that Google just happened to get a picture of that. And then a little bit later, you could see where they camouflaged over it, and then a little while later, they made it look like this, like it's green. But it's really a submarine base for all their new subs, and it's very close to Taiwan, and it's in what's called the South China Sea. You may have heard of that. So that's where that is. A special camera, and I'm only going to have one slide on this. we're all aware that a prism takes white light and spreads it into the rainbow colors. And there are things called, and a regular eyes are sort of red, blue, green, 3-color eyes. There are some sensors that are called multispectral sensors that maybe cut that up into 10 bands. Well, we built a device called a hyperspectral sensor that chops that spectrum from blue to red, a little bit beyond red, into 100 bands. And when we do that, we no longer just add those bands and make images. We process them like a signal. And when we do that, we can detect features that you can't see with your eye or with a regular camera or even with a multispectral camera. And we, at the same time, we can see things we want to see. We can suppress things we don't want to see. For example, if we want to see Frank's red Mustang, we can tell it, look for that red paint. And don't show us the land, don't show us all the grass, don't show us the trees. And what you'll see is a dark background with a dot that corresponds to his vehicle. This shows you what can be done with that. Here's some paints, and I'll go through each of these in a little bit more detail. But, and you can see how the background was suppressed there. See if we can get this working. Oh, there we go. Whoops. Whoa, 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 whoa. Okay. You can see the paints. Here's an object. And I need to go back one more. There we go. So here's the object. There's camouflage right there, but you can't even see it in this picture. But there it is. These military tents all look the same, except this guy is different. So that could be like a command control center, Saddam Hussein's living quarters, whatever. But it's something that we can now track. Because if you see that tent, we know that maybe that's the same tent that we saw before. And then here is a building, and it's under the jungle camouflage. And if you're flying along, you know how difficult it is to see things on the ground because everything is happening so fast. Well, there it is. Just pokes right through. Whoops. I did the wrong thing. There we go. So here's the thing with the paint. What that is a Scud missile in its transporter, erector, launcher. So it rides on this truck right here on the back. It goes where it needs to go to launch. Then what happens is it gets erected, which stands vertically. These arms that are holding it come off, and they light it off, and away it goes. Here's a close-up of the tents, and the tent on the far side is the guy. This one right here. They all look the same, but to the sensor and to the processing, it's different.
So, perhaps, what is it seeing? What is different about that tent?
It's a different material, although it looks like it's the same. It's a different material, and somewhere in the spectrum, maybe in the near infrared, it's different. We didn't know this at the time we took this data set. And when we looked at it, we said, wow, look at that. So, and the other thing that we found was, we found another tent that just had a corner, just a little corner of the tent that had been patched. And it had been patched with the same material that showed green here. So we knew that tent, we could follow that tent wherever it went because it was a fingerprint for that particular tent. Oh, darn. Okay. And here's the building. Again, you can't really see it in the. You can't really see it in that upper left picture. In the hyperspectral image picture, discrimination picture. It just stands out. And then this is the ground truth on the bottom. And what it is just a little bit of the red tile that's on that roof coming through the canopy that lets you do the detection. Here's something else that wasn't on the slide, but we had it set for buildings and for blue things because down in the jungle, and this was down south somewhere, we had it set for blue plastic, blue tanks for chemicals for drug manufacture, and the buildings that were associated with it. And so we got a hit, and when we looked back at the image, there was something. And when we had ground truth, there's the tank, the blue tanks that went with that. Looking at the Malibu fire in '93, we flew over that, and all of the orange areas are areas where there's still vegetation, and all of the dark areas are where the fire burned. And the field of view of the sensor was it's pretty narrow, and the field of view of the sensor is about this much. And we were flying in this direction. What we did was we put a scan mirror in front of our sensor. So it was, as the plane moved forward, it would scan, and then it would fly back in a millisecond. And then it would scan and fly back. And there's a line that you can't see, but all of these images, if you look could see them real close, there's a little tiny line that goes every so often. And it's tipped over, and that's because it started imaging here, and then as it went up, the plane moved forward and up and over and up and over. And so all of those swaths are inclined a little bit, but the images are straight. So how did we put our little camera on aircraft? Well, one of the big boons was to use a Tyler mount. Let me say it this way: Old Man Tyler used to build all of the mounts for the movie cameras. All of the fancy fly-along, fly-through parts of a movie were done with a Jet Ranger and some kind of a Tyler mount. Some of those mounts are gyroscopic mounts that operators just on the side of the plane. Some of them are smaller ones like this. This is the one we used, and it worked just marvelously for us because we had a contract with Tyler. We had a contract with Hardy Aviation with the 555 Tango Hotel Jet Ranger. And we'd say, we'd like to be out there and fly Thursday at 1 o'clock. They would call Tyler. Tyler would deliver the mount, which was the aircraft sensor interface. When we showed up, this mount was attached to the helicopter, and there was no camera or anything on it. It was just empty. We just pulled the pin. It was a V-groove mount. We pulled that out, slid our hyperspectral sensor in, locked it in, ran the cable around. We put our electronics in the back seat, and we were ready to fly away. Our integration was maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Same for de-integration, just no big deal. This is on a Cessna. What we would do, and the aircraft owners trusted us because we'd been around a lot of aircraft. And so sometimes they would take the door off, sometimes we would take the door off, take the seat out, and then we would put in the interface plate, which is this guy right here. And it was built out of aircraft grade aluminum, and it attached to the seat rails in the Cessna, just like the seat would. It had a lock, just like a seat lock. And so everything was certified. We just walked in, pulled the door, pulled the seat, popped this in, locked it in place, and then we put the, what I would call a bandbox in on top of it and anchored it. And we had a couple of computers in that. And then in the back seat, we had two operators. One that was the data operator, making sure that the data was okay, being recorded and everything. And the other seat was a mission operator that had moving map displays, GPS and all of that. So we could direct the pilot, do this, do that, do the other. And this shows it ready to fly away. On the Hueys, they were generous enough, and I'm talking about the manufacturer now, to put on little rings in the floor. And what we did was we took a piece of plywood, and we cut holes, of course, bigger than those rings, but in the same locations. And then we would take just a piece of a PVC cap with a hole in it, and we would put a bolt hook in it, hook that ring, run it through the cap, put a wing nut on top, and screw it down. And that would give us contact, big area of contact with the plywood interface. And so we would take that down. The only other bad thing about this was the bolt hook was really hard on these. And you only did that once, and we ended up buying just little pieces of rubber hose and covering those bolt hooks ends with that because they were just lethal. And then you can see the sensor interface right here, and that is what this is right here, the sensor interface. And then that hole took this shaft, and then this was the sensor. The sensor actually was this piece plus the adapter. This is the sensor, and then this is a color camera, and it was looking down at the ground here. And again, it took us no time to integrate, maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes, about the same to integrate. The other thing was we used for the Hueys and carrying troops, if it was really cold, if they flew very long, their legs would get cold. And when the plane, when they deplaned, they couldn't walk because their legs were so cold. So what they did was they manufactured heater blankets to go across all the troops' legs. And they provided a plug for plugging that blanket in. So we just took and plugged our electronics into that plug, and we were fine. Now, one time we were integrating to go to Bolivia, and it turned strange, but we were integrating in Hawaii out of Wheeler. And we thought they were going to provide the cable between the helicopter and our electronics. We got out there, they said, no, that's your business. Well, there goes the day. Well, so what we did is we went down to a local appliance store and we bought a dryer cable. Cut the end off, put our stuff on, because they wouldn't let us put their stuff on. We handed it to them. The aircraft people put their connector on, did the testing. They said, that's okay, you can now plug this into our machine. I said, okay, and it all worked just fine. But sometimes you just have to make do.
MacGyver.
What?
Like MacGyver.
Yeah. Now, one of the things we did, I was in Washington, and U.S. Southern Command had a liaison office in D.C. And I was just by there, and I knew the guy, and I guess we've been doing some work for them. And I was just sitting doing some work, and he came in, he said, can you go find something? I said, well, maybe. I mean, that's a kind of a broad question. He said, okay. So he left. I thought, what the devil could that guy have lost? I thought, maybe he lost a nuke. And they don't know where it went. And they want us to fly along on the same flight path and see if we can find that nuke. Well, that wasn't the case. It turned out they wanted us to find an Army duffel bag. which will come down from a nuclear weapon. But what happened was Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols, these are the two geniuses that put the bomb together that blew up the federal building in Oklahoma City. And they had, before that, they had lived there in Kingman, Arizona. And before McVeigh did the bombing in Oklahoma City, he had a duffel bag full of something. And after the bomb went off, they caught both those guys. Terry Nichols was trying to save his skin. And he said, listen, I know where there was that McVeigh had a duffel bag and he hid it in the desert. And so the FBI was absolutely frantic to find that duffel bag. They had tried everything. They tried dogs, they tried search teams, they tried everything. They couldn't find it. We didn't either. But we got an Army duffel bag and we trained on it. And we went out into this area that's circled in red. And we flew and flew and flew. It turns out we brought a helicopter from Van Nuys, there north of LA, all the way out to Kingman, Arizona. When we got there, we hadn't told the pilot what was going on. We were flying for the FBI or anything. He was just going to show up on Thursday at 10 o'clock, end of story. Well, he showed up on time and everything was fine. We were being chauffeured by the FBI. And so we walked over to the couple of cars that were there, that were FBI cars, and we just opened the door to get in. When we opened the door, our pilot looked in, and all he saw was guns and radios. And his eyes got big as saucers, because he didn't know what the hell was going on. It could have been a drug thing for all he knew. But we calmed him down and told him it was all okay. And that radio there, you could call Janet Reno, and everything was cool. And he said, oh, okay. So Kingman was a funny place, because we got there and we stayed overnight there with the FBI. And everybody, us and the FBI, decided that town was too rough for us. And so we moved. We still operated out of the kind of a guard facility there, but we stayed in Laughlin. If you were just a tourist coming through, it was no big deal. But if you looked like you were feds, and of course we had targets on our back just like they did, it was not the place to be. So we would be to the airport and be through town, go out here, do whatever we were going to do, come back through town, whatever, pick up the pilot and go back to Laughlin. When we were in Bolivia, one of the times, we were there several times, this was a little place just carved out of the desert. It had a dirt runway. They'd constructed some makeshift buildings on it. They'd had, along this road, they'd set up sandbags with machine gunners in them in case somebody decided to come in and cause some trouble. They poured, I don't know, maybe 3 or so concrete pads for the helicopters. And those helicopters, it's hard to see, but right up here on the tail, you can see that they're Bolivian colors. So we flew with Bolivian Hueys and Bolivian pilots. So we integrated on the Bolivian Huey, flown by their pilots. We flew at 250 feet, which is pretty low. Now, we were accompanied by a gunship behind us, and we had a machine gunner on the opposite side of our Huey. So somebody was a little concerned about the kind of ground activity we might encounter. We didn't encounter any, but they were surely ready for it. It turned out that now there was DEA. You think of the DEA guys with their vests and their bulletproof vests and their little badges hanging. Well, down here they had a Rambo squad. That was the no shit squad. And I think they were training the Bolivian equivalent, which were called UMAPARs. And so, and I think that the DEA Rambo squad thought we were part of the Bolivians. And they would just wipe their machine guns across in front of us and everything. It was a little scary. They did not like us. And I think it was because of the association with the Bolivians. But it turned out that all of the missions that were out of there, and as soon as we deplaned and got our equipment off, DEA was on and they flew a mission, or with the UMAPARs. So we had to be out of there with our equipment ASAP. But it turned out that all of the missions were compromised by the pilots. All the missions that were flown out of there were compromised. There was an NSA plane high and over, and he was listening to all the traffic, and you could tell that all the flight missions were compromised, I guess, to the cartel by the pilots. And the picture, this is me standing here. This is my best friend and co-conspirator. These are the two Bolivian pilots. Now, when you manufacture, growing coca down in Bolivia is not illegal. You can grow that's not a big deal. You just can't convert it into paste or into cocaine. But it is not, if you look at your hedges here in the desert or anywhere else, that looks like cocaine. The new leaves are light green. As they get older, they go to a darker green. I could take out my hedges in my house and I could plant coca plants in there. And nobody would ever, ever, ever know the difference. But it takes a lot of chemicals and a lot of chemistry to do the conversion to a paste and then to the cocaine hydrochloride. But when you pick it, it's not a crop that ripens like peaches or cherries or something. So what they do, and if you pick a lot of it, it's going to spoil because the moisture in it is going to get fungus in it and all kinds of stuff. So what they do is they pick just a little bit of it. They just have a few pickers that pick the fields, and then they take the cocaine and they put it on, or the coca leaf, and they put it on drying pads. And you can see sort of a light green on these guys and nothing on these two. But you can see the building, so you can see they were set up to do that. So these three areas here, that's where the coca leaf that was picked that day is drying. And this is how they dry it. They have it looks like a whisk broom with real long bristles on the end. And it's usually on a piece of canvas, but sometimes it can just be dirt. And they just keep turning it and turning it and turning it to get the leaf dry. And then they put it in very large gunny sacks, put it on the back of a truck, off to market it goes. And there's market. And like I say, it's not illegal, so you walk up to this lady and you say, I want some coca leaf, however you say that. And she picks up a little hand scale, she puts a rock on one side, she reaches in her bag, pulls out the coca leaf until the scale tips, she pops it into a plastic bag, you pay her a few Bolivianos and go on your way. The other thing you can do is, now you can either get the dry leaf or basically the green leaf. And they, at the high altitudes, like La Paz, which is the capital of Bolivia, is at 12,000 feet, and the airport is at 14,400 feet. And when you're there and you look out in the distance, there are very, very tall mountains, the Andes. And so people in that whole area chew coca leaf for the alkaloid. And they have a little bag that they carry, the guys out in out in the countryside have a little bag of lye that makes their saliva basic, because if it's acidic, it won't extract the alkaloid. So they put a little bit of that in their mouth, and then they chew the leaf, and the alkaloid comes out, and they can tolerate the altitude. And the tea, if you wanted it, American Airlines served coca tea going into Bolivia, going into the airport. You say, yeah, I'll take a cup. My friend Don, he had a tremendous headache. We stayed overnight there before we flew back to the States. And when he got up in the morning, he went down to the restaurant and got a cup of coca tea to kill the headache. And speaking of something that's illegal, it looks like this is illegal. These two areas are camouflaged. This is out in the same area that some of this other data was taken. There's no reason to hide out there because it's all legal, unless you're converting some of that leaf into paste. I mean, you can have a very large amount of leaf into a relatively small amount of paste, and then it's easy to transport that small amount of paste somewhere else to a lab where that paste is reprocessed again, redissolved, whatever, and converted into cocaine hydrochloride. The reason that people don't do that here probably is because the chemistry is complicated. It takes lots of sulfuric acid, diethyl ether, and acetone, and sulfuric acid, kerosene, and all kinds of stuff like that. And people just don't want to bother with it. It's easier to go out and buy it. But we can see that there's some reason that they were camouflaging what was going on there. And we were all set to go to Iraq during the war. Had our shots. We were only days away from going. It turned out that the military, there was two kinds of military in Iraq. There was the Royal Guards, and then there was just the regular, everyday militia. Well, the militia was no problem. Point your finger at them, go bang. They'd throw down their weapons, put up their hands. The Royal Guard was different. Very, very different. We wanted to go after the Royal Guard. It turned out that from the air you couldn't tell the difference, but our sensor could. And in fact, we had a Royal Guard uniform. In fact, I couldn't find the picture, but I actually put the Royal Guard uniform on my daughter, gave her a gun, and I got a picture of her. And I wanted to include that, but I couldn't find the picture. But what our sensor was going to do was to look out, and it was going to identify two different things. It was going to identify the camouflage and the troops. And it would come up on the screen, one color dots for the troops, one color dots for the camouflage. And we were, like I said, days away from flying that. And I'm sure we would have had, they never told us, but I'm sure that we would have had gunships with us. So, thanks for your attention.
Any questions? Bruce?
Did it fix his headache?
Yes. Yes.
Bruce, could those sensors see through clouds?
I'm sorry?
Could those sensors see through clouds?
No.
Okay, so clouds are obliterated.
Now, on some of the missions, we flew with foliage penetrating radar. We had a much larger plane, big twin engine plane, and we had a very sizable foliage penetrating radar on it, besides our sensor. And they wanted to fly below the clouds so that our sensor and that sensor were working cooperatively. And that was a big problem down there, particularly in Panama, because we would fly along the Colombian border. And the way the clouds came in, we wanted the sun to be higher in the sky for illumination purposes, except that's when all the cloudiness came in. And the foliage penetrating radar didn't care. They just wanted, but they wanted to be below the clouds too. But they could have flown over the clouds if they wanted to. It was, ground fog almost. So, any other questions? Yes, Doug.
Yeah, you were talking about using wavelength of light chopped into 100 different slices. Were you able to communicate with the submarine with those laser beam lights?
No, we didn't use that. That was just part of my experience. It took a very special laser and a super special detector. It took a hot rubidium vapor detector in order to detect the laser light. So it was a big deal. It wasn't just a little thing that you think of on your camera. It was a hot rubidium vapor detector. And it had all kinds of complicated things around it in order to do the detection. And I don't know where that ever went, but they surely wanted to get something to communicate with those submarines at a higher data rate than they were getting with this extremely low frequency system that they have now up in, I think, Wisconsin.
So the long and short of it is still no communication between the airplane and the submarine.
No, you don't want to do that with an airplane, because if you do the airplane, they know where you are.
Mm.
And in fact, what they had to do, the concept of operation was that the satellite would illuminate here, 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 as it flew along, here, here, here. They didn't know where the sub was. Somewhere in all of that, here, 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 was the submarine, and we were downloading. And the submarine, it was almost a one-way path, because if anybody could detect the sub broadcasting, they'd say, there he is. And once you know where he is, then it's a lot easier to follow him around too.
Right, yeah.
And so they had to be very, very careful. It was a nightmare. And we looked at how many contacts we could make versus the latitude of the submarine and the orbit that the satellite was in, and all of that sort of stuff. It was a complicated process. It wasn't just a matter of shining a laser on a submarine.
Because you would light them up so they could be detected and killed potentially.
We would send the beam down to the laser, and then in reason, compared to the old system, a high data rate, getting the information down to the sub where he wouldn't have to surface. I mean, if he comes part way up, he can get an antenna up and use regular RF to talk to the satellite. But in a wartime scenario, you don't want to do that. You've got to keep your footprint zero. And that means you've got to communicate with that sub. Now, while he's submerged and traveling, both. Those are the two requirements. He can be submerged down to, and I don't remember how far, and moving. And that was really important, because if they know where you're at, you're dead.
What years were you at KRW?
I'm sorry?
What years were you working at KRW?
I think it was about 83 for 15 years.
Okay.
And then I retired from TRW. I took a week off and went up the street to Raytheon, worked 15 more years and retired from there. Okay. Yeah. And I'll tell you, I really miss this kind of work. I mean, we saw things. It was really interesting, because for lunch, for entertainment in the classified area, I had two screens. It was a classified machine, obviously. And on this one, I had like Google Earth, and I could see all of the different Predator or the ones with the missiles on, the Reapers, flying around, and we could see where they were looking. And on this screen, I could see the imagery coming out of that predator or reaper.
Whoa.
And I could say, I want to see what this guy's looking at. And I could just double click it, and the image would come up over here. And of course, daytime here was nighttime there, so all of it was infrared imagery, heat imagery. But that was really great. You see all kinds of things. People walking around, going through the mountain, 5 or 6 guys, wondering what the heck they're up to. You see them come out of a compound, walk down the wall, go to the bathroom, come back, go back inside. Any other questions? Okay.
All right.
Frank,
Thank
thank
you
you.
so much, Bruce.
Yeah.